Bell confession has power. Sometimes the words we never say are the ones that shape us most. Pushpin, don't forget to subscribe to Tears and Truth for more emotional real-life inspired stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Some letters don't need to be sent, they just need to be felt. The story begins in the small, humid town of Belgaum, India, though it could have been anywhere, really. A place where the days were long, the classrooms crowded, and most teachers barely remembered your name unless you topped the class or caused trouble. Ayan was neither. He was just in the middle. Average marks, quiet demeanor. A boy who blended into the background so well that even in his own house, he sometimes felt like wallpaper. His father, an officer in the state electricity board, had a short temper and high expectations. His mother, loving but burdened, always seemed to be doing dishes or counting rupees at the kitchen counter. Their family wasn't broken in the way dramatic stories are. There was no screaming at dinner, but it was quietly cracked in ways no one talked about, especially not Ayan. Ayan spent most of his days buried in books, not because he loved them at first, but because it was safer to be in fiction than in his own life. He scribbled poems in the margins of his notebooks, none of which he ever showed anyone. He didn't know what to call the ache in his chest, loneliness, maybe, or the quiet kind of sadness that doesn't shout, just lingers. Then came the first day of class 11. A new year, a new section, and a new literature teacher. Ms. Rayne, she was different. Not just because she spoke fluent English with a trace of an American accent, or because she once said she used to teach in Boston before moving to India to care for her aging aunt. She was different because she noticed things. The way she looked each student in the eye. The way she gave small compliments that felt enormous. Like when she told Ayan, "Your handwriting has rhythm, like music." No one had ever said anything like that to him before. At first, Ayan thought it was just her job to be nice. But then came the day she paused while checking homework, glanced at his scribbled margins, and said softly, "Do you write poetry?" Ayan froze. His fingers curled into the edge of the bench. No, just random lines," he mumbled. She didn't push. She just nodded and said, "Random lines often turn into something beautiful when you let them breathe." That night, Ayan didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling fan spinning in circles, over and over, thinking about those words. For the first time, someone had seen past the silence, past the shell. The next few weeks, Ayan started staying a few minutes after class. He never said much, just lingered as she erased the board or packed her bag. Once, she lent him a copy of Catcher in the Rye, saying, "It's not a happy book, but it understands you when no one else does." He devoured it in 3 days. One afternoon, as rain pattered softly on the window panes and most students had gone home, Ms. Rayne noticed Ayan hadn't left. "Everything okay?" she asked. He looked at her, and his throat tightened. He wanted to say everything. That his father didn't believe in dreams. That sometimes he sat alone on the terrace and wished the wind would carry him somewhere else. That her class, her voice, was the only part of the day that didn't feel heavy. But all he said was, "Thank you for being kind." She smiled gently like she understood the rest. Maybe she did. Years would pass before Ayan could find the words he couldn't say that day, but he never forgot her smile, or how, for just 1 hour every weekday, he felt like he mattered. Ayan didn't know then that he was in the middle of the most important relationship of his teenage years. It wasn't romantic. Not in the way stories usually paint such connections. There were no secret crushes or hidden love notes. It was something much quieter, and, in some ways, much more powerful. He had no name for it. But if he'd been older, he might have called it recognition. For the first time, he felt seen, not for his grades or his obedience or his ability to keep quiet, but for something deeper. Something that lived in the pages of his notebooks and the silences between words. He began writing more, mostly at night under the dull yellow light of his study lamp, careful not to wake his younger sister who slept on the floor beside him. His poems weren't polished. They were messy, raw, full of emotion he didn't know how to speak. He started leaving a few lines on the corner of his assignment pages. Never obvious, never titled. But she always noticed. Sometimes she'd leave a comment in red ink, "There's truth here," or "This line breathes." And once, "Don't stop writing." It was the first time anyone had encouraged him for something he wasn't supposed to be doing. At home, no one knew. His father still asked him what marks he'd scored. His mother still handed him a steel plate with warm roti and dal without meeting his eyes. But in that quiet classroom with soft chalk dust in the air, Ion found a small corner of freedom. One day, during a discussion on Shakespeare's Hamlet, Ms. Rayne asked the class, "Do you think silence can be louder than speech?" Some laughed, some shrugged. Ion whispered, almost to himself, "Sometimes silence is the only language you have." She looked at him, just for a second, and nodded, her expression soft. Exactly. It felt like being handed a key to a door he didn't know existed. But like all beautiful things, that year passed too quickly on the last day of school. Everyone was taking selfies, scribbling farewell messages on each other's uniforms. Ion lingered near her desk, trying to summon the courage to say something real, something true. But she was surrounded by students, their laughter loud, their energy chaotic. He stood there for a while, and then walked away. He didn't even say goodbye. That night, he cried quietly into his pillow, not because he was in love with her, but because he didn't know how to carry that kind of gratitude without breaking. Years passed. He got into college in Pune, then transferred to a university in Massachusetts. Literature turned into creative writing, and eventually into teaching. He never forgot her, though. Every time he stood in front of a class, he heard her voice in the back of his mind. Be kind. Listen first. Teach more than what's in the textbook. At T23. During a cold February night in Boston, Ion sat at his desk with a mug of black tea, fingers trembling slightly as he typed. It wasn't a novel. It wasn't a poem. It was a letter he should have written years ago. He began. "Dear Ms. Rayne, you won't remember me, not really. Just another quiet student among many. But you changed my life without knowing." He poured his heart into it. The moments she probably didn't even remember. The day she lent him a book, the time she said his lines, breathed. The way she made him feel like he wasn't invisible. He ended the letter with something that had taken him years to understand. "You were the light in a very dark room. I never loved you the way a boy loves a woman. I loved you the way a broken person loves the one who helps them begin to heal." He signed it. He folded it. He slipped it into an envelope. But he didn't mail it. Why? He couldn't explain. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was the belief that some things are meant to live inside you, not out in the world. He tucked the letter into a book on his shelf, The Catcher in the Rye, and left it there. It had been nearly 5 years since Ion had placed that letter inside The Catcher in the Rye. By then, he had become Mr. Khan to his students, an assistant professor at a liberal arts college in Vermont, teaching creative writing and poetry. The irony of life wasn't lost on him. The quiet boy from Belgaum was now helping other quiet kids find their voice. He often wondered what Ms. Rayne would think if she saw him now. Would she smile that same gentle smile and say, "I knew you'd make something of yourself"? Or would she struggle to remember the boy in the third row with unruly hair and a whisper-soft voice? It didn't matter, really, because he remembered her. Every time a student stayed back after class, awkward and hesitant, Ion thought of the 17-year-old version of himself. And every time he responded with patience and sincerity, he knew he was echoing her. One rainy November afternoon, Ion was organizing his bookshelf. He rarely had time anymore for the kind of reading he used to do, but that day nostalgia tugged at him. He pulled out The Catcher in the Rye, that old dog-eared copy, pages yellowing with time. The letter was still there, unsent, unread, still carrying every ounce of the emotion he'd once poured into it. He unfolded it, skimmed the lines. His own words felt like a stranger's now, but not in a bad way. In the way that you outgrow certain clothes, but keep them anyway because they remind you of who you were. He set it on his desk. Something inside him shifted. It wasn't guilt for not sending it. It wasn't longing. It was resolve. He didn't want the letter to sit forgotten. He didn't know if she was still in Belgaum, still teaching, still alive even. But suddenly, he needed to find out. The next few days were a blur of Google searches, LinkedIn rabbit holes, and hesitant Facebook messages to former classmates. Most of them didn't remember her name or assumed she'd moved away. And then a reply from someone he hadn't spoken to since class 12. "Rayne, ma'am? Yeah, she left school a few years after we graduated. Her aunt passed away. I think she went back to the States. Someone said she teaches in Oregon now, but I'm not sure." Oregon. Ion stared at the word for a long time. Later that night, after finishing his lecture notes and grading a stack of essays, he opened his laptop and typed, Professors named Rayne Oregon Literature. It was a long shot, but there she was. Professor Emily Rayne, adjunct faculty, Portland Community College courses. English literature, creative writing, world poetry. He stared at the photo beside the bio. She looked older. Of course she did. But the eyes were the same, warm, wise, knowing. He felt 17 again. Fingers trembling. He opened his email. He didn't send the letter. Not exactly. Instead, he wrote something new. Something simpler. Dear Professor Rayne, you may not remember me, but I was once your student in Belgaum, India. My name is Ayan Khan. I just wanted to say thank you. Your words, your kindness, your belief in the unseen. It changed my life. I teach now because of you. You once told me that random lines can turn into something beautiful. I think I finally believe you. He hit send. No attachment. No expectations. Just truth. And sometimes that's enough. It was 3 days later, Thursday afternoon, 3:12 p.m., when Ayan got the notification. From Rayne at pcc.edu. Subject. A letter I never sent. His heart raced. For a moment, he hovered his mouse over the email without opening it. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding on to the hope of hearing back. Until now. He clicked. Dear Ayan, of course I remember you. You sat near the window. You barely spoke in class, but always listened with your whole face. I remember the poems, those little notes you used to leave in the margins of your essays. I remember wondering where you carried all that emotion and hoping life would be kind to you. Your email brought tears to my eyes. I don't know if teachers are supposed to say this, but hearing from former students, especially the ones who slipped through the cracks of attention, means everything. I often wondered what became of you. And now you're a teacher? That makes my heart full. You don't know how rare it is to see the ripple effect of your work. Thank you for letting me see it. With deep affection and pride, Emily Rayne. Ayan read it once, twice, a third time, then sat there, unmoving, while the afternoon sun filtered through his window. He didn't cry, but only because the feeling was too large for tears. He thought back to the day he first stayed after class, to the moment he said, "Thank you for being kind," and how she smiled like she understood. And now, all these years later, she still remembered him. It wasn't closure. It was completion. That night, he pulled the old letter from the book and read it one last time. Then, slowly, deliberately, he tore it into pieces, not out of anger or regret, but because the words had already found their way to her, in a better form, in a real conversation, in truth that had finally been spoken. He placed the pieces in the fireplace and lit a match. They curled and blackened, turning to ash, and with it, something inside him finally exhaled. The weeks that followed were gentler somehow. His lectures became a little more open, his feedback more heartfelt. Students lingered after class, just as he once did, and he welcomed them. Not as interruptions, but as opportunities. One day, a student named Leela, shy, brilliant, always scribbling in the back of her notebook, waited until everyone else had left. She looked nervous. She held something in her hand. A folded piece of paper. I don't know who else to show this to, she said, voice trembling. It's a poem, I think. Ayan took the paper, read it slowly. It was raw, painful, beautiful. He looked up, eyes warm. This line breathes. Leela blinked. What? He smiled almost to himself. Don't stop writing. She broke into a small, startled grin, then nodded. After she left, Ayan sat in the quiet classroom and looked at the clock. It was 4:03 p.m., the same hour he'd once waited in silence, hoping someone would notice the storm inside him. And now he understood. Healing doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's passed from one person to another, quietly, softly, like a torch in the dark. He whispered, "Thank you, Ms. Rayne." Years passed. Ayan turned 30, then 32. His beard grew in thicker, his voice settled deeper. He published essays, guided students through thesis seasons and heartbreaks, and stood as faculty advisor for the campus literary journal. But despite how far he'd come, every now and then, his mind drifted back to her. To the woman who unknowingly saved him by simply seeing him. One spring, he received an invitation. The Portland Community College was hosting a symposium on the role of emotion in literature. The event welcomed educators from around the country. And there, buried on the third page of the program, was the name. Keynote panelist Professor Emily Rayne. It felt like destiny, or at least a well-written plot twist. Ion registered that same evening. On the day of the event, he arrived early. Oregon was cooler than Vermont, filled with a damp greenness he hadn't expected. His nerves buzzed beneath his blazer, but his hands remained steady. He sat in the fourth row, not the third. And then she entered us. Rayne, Professor Rayne, was older now, gray streaks in her once auburn hair, but her presence still carried that quiet gravity. She wore a soft green scarf, and when she began to speak, her voice still carried the same warmth that once made poetry feel like salvation. She spoke about how literature had saved her after her mother's death, how teaching in India was a chapter of unexpected grace, and how the smallest gestures, a compliment, a patient pause, could alter the course of a young person's life. Ion knew she was speaking about him, not by name, but he felt it, like his story had quietly slipped into her memories too. After the session ended, he waited. She was surrounded by people, students, colleagues, fans. He stood off to the side, unsure. And then, she saw him. Her expression shifted. A small pause. Recognition bloomed slowly. "Ion?" she asked, stepping forward. He smiled. "Still sitting near the window, just on the other coast now." She laughed softly and pulled him into a gentle hug. They sat and talked, about books, about India, about life and grief and healing. She told him she'd kept his email saved in a folder she called Letters That Matter. He told her about the letter he never sent and the fire that finally let it go. At one point, she said, "You were one of the ones I worried about. You were so quiet. I always hoped you'd find someone who heard you." He smiled. "I did. You." That night, in a modest hotel room in Portland, Ion sat by the window. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. He opened a fresh journal page and began to write. But this time, it wasn't a confession. It was a story. About a boy who was saved by kindness. About a teacher who gave without knowing what she gave. About a letter that was never mailed, but found its way, anyway. Because sometimes, words don't need a stamp or an envelope. They just need time, and courage, and a heart willing to remember. Candle confession is powerful. It heals, connects, transforms silence into stories. If this touched you, share it, and remember, there's always someone whose life changed because of a small act of care. Subscribe to Tears and Truth for more stories that reveal the heart behind the silence.